Hey guys, back again with another video, kind of a freeform discussion slash impressions video, and we're going to talk about the PlayStation VR, something I've not really talked about much on the channel. Now, there's different VR headsets out there. It's generally known that the PlayStation VR tends to be the best one. I think it's got like the best library of games, though there are some neat exclusives that you can play on the Oculus Rift and what's the other one, HTC Vive. But those ones have always been a lot more expensive to get into than the PlayStation VR. I'm pretty sure the PlayStation VR is probably sold better than those ones. I might be wrong on that. But it's one of those things that I've always been interested in. I definitely wanted to try it. I've tried demos of it here and there. I think I tried it Eve Valkyrie when the VR like first came out. At like a little demo station. So I only played for like maybe 5 minutes, and there's been a couple demos I've played here and there, but it's always been a little too expensive for me to jump in. For a bundle, because I don't have the PlayStation camera, for a bundle you're looking at $379 to start with, which is pretty expensive. $449, and then this is Canadian. $449 if you want those Move controllers, which seem to be pretty good for a lot of games. A lot of games require them. A lot of them are optional, but they make the game a lot better. So it was just always one of those things I really wanted to try. There's certain games I just really wanted to try, but I don't know, it was just too much money to get into. So I did the next best thing. One of my friends has a VR and a PlayStation camera and Move controllers. I had to borrow all that. So yeah, I borrowed it from him for. It's been a couple weeks now. I've played tons of VR games. I've been on like this crazy VR kick lately. I wanted to play like everything I possibly could get my hands on. He lent me a bunch of physical games. I already had some games with VR modes included. Now, there are some games I missed out on that I wish I would have played. I played a lot of demos, too. I downloaded a ton of demos. So, basically, yeah, I played pretty much everything I wanted to play in this short period of time. I wanted to do a video kind of talking about the games, what I thought of the VR as a whole. And I mean, overall, before we get into the actual games, I'll give my kind of impressions on the VR, whether it's worth purchasing. I'm kind of mixed on it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's one of those things where I feel a lot of games don't actually fully take advantage of it. I found that a lot of the games I played were kind of disappointing with their use of VR. But when a game really takes advantage of the immersion that VR provides, being able to look all around you, and in some racing games, for instance, being like in a cockpit and getting that crazy immersion and getting almost like a sense of speed from it as well. That's where it really works. And with certain games, the way they kind of utilize your viewing space is fantastic. But unfortunately, just a lot of games don't really use it all that well. A lot of the experiences for VR are pretty short and very much they feel like very much like tech demos even now, like years after release. But there are definitely some killer apps for this VR from what I've heard. The two games that I would have liked to have played a bit more, Moss. I only played the demo. Apparently, that's one of the best VR games, and it seemed pretty interesting. Though it's one of those games where it's like you're kind of moving the character around, but then you're also using the PlayStation controller, the DualShock controller, to like move parts of the environment to kind of solve puzzles. It's kind of a game that I've sort of seen before, but there's definitely an immersion factor when you kind of add the VR to it. And then Beat Saber is probably the one that I really wanted to play, but unfortunately, he didn't have. There's no physical copy of that game. I didn't want to spend money on a game that I would only be able to play for a little bit and have to return the VR eventually. Yeah, unfortunately Beat Saber I wasn't able to play. That game looks awesome, kind of like a cool rhythm game. Apparently it's like a workout, that game, and it takes advantage of the VR pretty well from what I've heard. So I don't know, there's a decent amount of games for it that are really cool, but it's still pretty expensive to get into, and it does feel like a novelty in a lot of ways, but I think it's the unit itself is pretty good because it's comfortable. I gotta say, I felt like it was really comfortable. And even as someone that wears glasses, it's kind of designed for people that wear glasses and people that don't. So it was comfortable. There's a bunch of adjustments that you can do. And I don't know. My hair, like my head would start to itch sometimes, so I would have to take off the headset sometimes. But it is shockingly comfortable. Now, when you have to wear a headset on top of it, if you want to like talk to other people, if you're in party chat or whatever, and you have to like put a headset over top of it, then it gets a little uncomfortable. You can use, I think there's a microphone in the VR headset as well. I tried it out briefly. Apparently, the audio quality is not good from what I was hearing from other people I was talking to. That's kind of to be expected, I think. Now, a lot of people have mentioned like getting motion sickness from VR and it being a very intense experience. And I don't know. I've tried a bunch of games from pretty intense games all the way down to like very casual games, and I don't know. It never made me motion sick. And I played for extended periods. Some of these games I played for like 3 hours straight with the headset on, and it still I was still fine after the end of it. But I've never been one to get motion sick, like ever. I'm the type of person too that loves roller coasters and crazy thrill rides like that. So I don't know, like anything to do with motion, it just never really gets me sick in any kind of way. So that was probably a big part of it, because a lot of people have stress getting sick from the VR, but it wasn't the case with me. So it's weird. The VR, I think there's like two different models of it. I was using the Model 2. I can't remember the differences exactly. But the one thing I will say with the VR, the thing that's the other big negative for it, maybe it's because I didn't have the optimal setup, but I have enough space between my TV and my couch, at least from what the diagrams and all that were saying. But the head tracking I found to be kind of finicky in a lot of games, and I'd have to constantly adjust the PlayStation camera and move controllers, because there's a lot of like glitches and overall jankiness with the games. I'd have to like readjust and like close application for a lot of games to make sure the head tracking was working well. The move controllers didn't work in a lot of instances. Some games, and one game in particular, never worked. I tried it like 5 times and it would never work. Everything would be too close. So I couldn't really interact with the game world at all, no matter how I set up my camera or went into the settings and then messed with the VR settings. Nothing worked. The game was unplayable, and I guess we'll get to that. But yeah, it was kind of frustrating. So it's not a 100% ideal experience all the time. Like I found it to be very frustrating. Sometimes it just doesn't work. The VR doesn't work the way you want it to. So you definitely need a lot of space in your like living room or whatever to play the VR. If you have like a small room, unfortunately, I don't see VR working that well. Another thing too, they want the PlayStation camera, I guess, on top of your TV. A lot is like the optimal method, but like, who the hell has a TV that's like thick enough to have the camera be able to sit on top of it? Like everyone's got like fucking flat screen TVs these days. I don't know. I had to use the PlayStation camera beneath my TV, but yeah, some frustrations with like setup too. The setup of the VR takes well, not a long time, but it takes a little bit. And there's a bunch of cables everywhere. You got this like box that you've got all these cables running through. My setup is a complete mess right now because of this thing. So I'm gonna be glad to get rid of it and like free up a lot of space that way. But yeah, I guess we'll kind of get into the games now. A lot to cover here, so I'm not going to talk too in depth about most of them. We'll start with Thumper. This is a limited run game. I got this like ages ago, but didn't want to play it because I wanted to play this in VR. Apparently, it's best played in VR. It's weird. I was actually excited for this game, and it's not really my cup of tea. I don't know. I just don't find it that fun. It's kind of like a rhythm game where you're going down this track and you're kind of like pressing left and right and pressing buttons and going in time with the rhythm with the songs that are in the game. I've heard it's very intense, but I didn't find the VR added that much to the experience. It didn't give me like this sense of speed or crazy sense of immersion or anything, which is weird because the people always really talked up this game. So I was kind of surprised that it didn't really do much for me. So not only did the VR aspect not impress me all that much, I didn't think the game was that fun. Honestly, there's a lot of like trial and error to it as well. Very difficult game. I don't know. It's weird. I like rhythm games, but this just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't grab me. It didn't stick with me. I was kind of disappointed by that one. So we'll talk about the kind of the minor games here. Tetris Effect. Cool VR. I like what it adds to the game, but it is Tetris at the end of the day, and I've never been the biggest Tetris fan, so I didn't end up playing this game for that long. And the VR is kind of minor in the end, but the visuals to this game are just really cool. It's got a really cool visual style, and the music's fantastic in this as well. And it's Tetris. You can't really go wrong with Tetris. A lot of people absolutely love Tetris. It's just, I don't know, it's never really been my thing. I'm not into puzzle games that much, so Tetris I don't know. It's never really done much for me, but it's a decent VR experience and really cool if you really like Tetris. I've heard this is like the best Tetris game, anyways. So we've got Psychonauts, what's it called? Rhombus of Ruin. Very short, like, point and click adventure game kind of thing. Pretty simple puzzles. It's got some cool humor to it, but the VR didn't really add that much to it for me. I thought it was kind of boring for the most part. So I don't know. I don't think this is really worth looking into. The original Psychonauts, I've heard good things. I still need to play that game one of these days. I still not really touched it. So we got Zone of the Enders Second Runner. It's got like a VR mode. This game I wasn't into. I kind of wanted to play Zone of the Enders for a long time, but I've never really been into mech games all that much. And I got like a couple missions into this. The VR, you have like kind of a cockpit view. But I don't know, I found the combat to be kind of just clunky and messy. It was very hard to tell which attacks you were doing and if you were hitting the enemies. That might have been maybe a part of VR. I didn't actually try it without VR. But I don't know, I just didn't like the combat, how it flowed, and just how like talky this game is. Like I know, like Kojima worked on this game, right? Like he did the story or whatever. Maybe I'm wrong there. I might actually be wrong there, but like so much fucking dialogue in this game. It's just ridiculous. You fight for like 1 minute and then you've got dialogue that goes on for like 10 minutes. And it's just, I don't know. And the story was not interesting to me, probably because I didn't play the first game, but it's just, I don't know. It's not really my style of game at all, but I've heard good things about it. I don't know, the VR didn't seem that impressive. It seemed like kind of like an afterthought with this one as well. It's kind of a remaster, I think, of the second game on PS2. But yeah, Zone of the Enders not really my thing. I know we're starting off negative. I kind of want to get like the negative games out of the way first. Batman VR, you need the, I think you can use the controller, but I actually tried with the controller at first and it didn't work like at all. Like the game just was flat out broken. It worked with Move controllers, but I had to stand up. I couldn't sit down and play or else everything would get all finicky and stop working. Now, this is a very short experience. It only takes a couple hours, and I guess that was the main problem with it. But I had heard that this is still one of the better VR experiences, but I don't know. I was kind of let down by this. I didn't think it was that cool. There was like you do feel like Batman in some ways, and it's pretty neat. But it felt like a glorified tech demo to me. And I don't know. It just didn't have a lasting impact. And despite some cool moments here and there, I don't know. It just didn't really grab me all that much. Maybe too a part of it is because I'm not like the biggest Batman fan, but there are definitely some cool moments. But the detective stuff in this game is very like simplified and not very involving. I don't know. Again, it didn't do much for me, even though people seem to rave about this one, kind of. Okay, so Rick and Morty virtual reality. I love Rick and Morty. It's one of my favorite shows. I just adore it. So I was excited to actually play this. And this game doesn't work. It flat out does not fucking work. It was very frustrating playing this game. No matter what I would do, either everything would be too close and I couldn't grab things in the environment, so I couldn't make any progress in it, or parts of the game just wouldn't work. Where one part where you had to make a Mr. Meeseeks to grab like this item that's outside of your playing range. You have to spawn these guys by throwing these balls, and it's so inaccurate. It's impossible to get these things to land where you need it to land. And it took me like fucking forever to get this guy to get into the right position. And finally, when he did, you had to use the move controller to kind of like aim down and pick up the item. You couldn't play this game sitting down. It was impossible. You had to play this game standing up. When I finally did get it working where I could like actually like reach stuff in the environment. So you had to pick up this ball that's outside of this garage, and you got to throw it back inside the garage, and it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't get into the garage, and when it would disappear. So I couldn't pick it up, and it was so fucking frustrating. I just could not progress in this game. The move controllers kept glitching out. My things would drop, even though I was holding them in my hands, as it were. So it was just a complete mess. Like this game just is flat out broken. And I would be pissed off if I actually paid money for this shit. I don't know, man. This was very disappointing to me because I was actually looking forward to it being Rick and Morty. So I couldn't even see if it was actually like humorous and had all these cool references to the show because I couldn't make any progress in the fucking thing. So yeah, that was just a disaster, that game. It made me very frustrated. So moving on, we've got The Invisible Hours, and this is another game that just didn't fucking work. It would just like it would constantly go black and say I wasn't in range of the camera, which I definitely was. It's like the controls would just flat out not work sometimes, like with the move controllers, like kind of looking through the environments. It was mainly like kept saying like I wasn't in range or whatever. So I gave up on the VR part of it. And I just played the game itself because the game itself is actually pretty cool. It's this cool like murder mystery where you're kind of like a ghost. You're kind of like, it's more like a passive experience where you can kind of go throughout this mansion and kind of view the different characters, and there's like a timeline that kind of goes on. You can kind of rewind and forward time, so you kind of understand. You kind of understand who the actual murderer is, and you kind of put the pieces together once you watch all the characters and how they interact throughout the different days. So it was kind of cool. I'd never really seen anything like that before. I thought it was an interesting concept. So I saw it through to the end and got the platinum trophy, and I quite enjoyed it. I thought the writing was pretty good. It's not like an amazing looking game. It's pretty low budget, but I thought it was neat. If you're looking for more like interaction with your games, it's definitely a very story driven experience. It's almost not a game in a way. It's almost like an interactive movie, but it's cool. It uses the medium in a cool way. So I'd actually recommend checking this game out. Don't worry about the VR mode because you can play it without VR now. Originally, it was only a VR game. Definitely look into it. It's a cool little murder mystery that I actually quite enjoyed. So moving on to Resident Evil 7. Of course, I had to play this in VR. People were telling me it's the best game in VR. This is terrifying experience, and I don't know. This kind of disappointed me. Now, I just found it to be kind of janky. I don't like the way combat works with the VR in this game, honestly, and it definitely provides some immersion. There's definitely some cool jump scares, and it definitely makes the game a little bit more creepier, but I didn't think it was all that scary, even with VR. And playing it again, I played maybe like half the game again. I've realized that I just actually don't like this game that much, especially coming after Resident Evil 2. I don't know. I don't really love the first person's perspective, and the game is way too scripted. Playing this game again made me realize how scripted this game is. I don't know, there's very few moments in the game where you're actually just exploring and solving puzzles and fighting enemies. A lot of it is just these scripted set piece kind of moments, and they're just not engaging on a second playthrough at all. They're just kind of irritating too to get through. And then there's that boat section which I kind of hated. I thought it was a pace killer, even the first playthrough. But the second playthrough, I got there and I was just like, okay, I can't do this again. It's just, I don't know, just the pacing of this game and just the more cinematic, like set piece, scripted way that it kind of progresses. I'm not crazy about. I've kind of done I don't know. I've thought of this game less and less now. I don't know. I don't think the game is as good as I first thought. I think Resident Evil 2 is leagues above this. I much more enjoyed that, and I don't. Honestly, people will say the VR. Maybe it's because I guess games don't really scare me all that much, but I didn't think the VR was actually that effective for me. So I'm in a minority here. That's a controversial opinion apparently, but I don't know. It didn't really do much for me. Probably mostly because I just don't like the game all that much. Turns out. So Robinson the Journey. This was like the first game I played on VR. It's okay. It's kind of like this short first-person adventure game with really annoying puzzles. An unforgiving checkpoint system that I absolutely fucking hate, making you redo puzzles and these climbing sections over and over again if you fail. It's like you're on this like world and there's like dinosaurs. You're kind of like scanning everything to add to your like database, which is fun. I like all that stuff. The writing's nothing special or anything like that. The cool thing with this game, though, the thing I really liked about it are the climbing sequences. So you kind of have to like use L2 and R2 to kind of like grab onto different like handholds, and it's all in first person, and you can fall and you can die, so you're kind of like climbing these like really high walls and stuff like that, and the VR adds like a real sense of immersion to it, and you really do feel like you're climbing, and that when you fall you're just like, oh fuck, and there's just, I don't know, the climbing sequences in this game I thought were actually really well done. I think they're far better than the rest of the game, which is kind of like a generic, a typical puzzle game with very obtuse, vague puzzles, especially towards the end, which I hated. I'd use a walkthrough at various points in this game to actually get through it. But I'd say it's worth playing, actually, and experiencing just purely for those climbing sequences, because I've never experienced anything quite like it. I hate climbing in like every game I've played. Uncharted, obviously, and just like all these other games, because they're just very passive, boring experiences with no stakes and no risk to it. This, I actually, like, my hands were sweating playing this thing. I was like, damn, it turns out VR is actually the one thing to make climbing in games fun. Which reminds me, developers, stop fucking putting climbing in games. It's shit. It's always been shit. It's not fun. Okay, so now moving on to the two best VR games, in my opinion. So first, Wipeout. And Drive Club VR is a demo I played that's actually the same kind of deal with this. Turns out, racing games, best use of VR. Racing games, especially Wipeout, are fantastic. So you've got this cockpit view in Wipeout, and it's amazing what VR adds to like the immersion of this game. It gives this sense of speed, and when you're like hitting other vehicles and taking these fast turns, it's like this genuine, like, it's almost like a roller coaster kind of like feeling, but it's like, oh, like, it's fucking great. Like, I was just so into this. I played this a bunch in VR, and I loved it. Drive Club VR gives you the same kind of sensation, but I think Wipeout's just a better game. Wipeout's always been fun, right? So, yeah, very surprised by Wipeout. Play Wipeout if you have VR. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I've heard it gets some people sick, but there's a bunch of options to kind of like reduce that, I think. Many different ways to kind of play this game, but man, racing games in VR, I was very much surprised by it. I think that's actually, like, racing games I like, but I don't play them too often. VR, it sells racing games pretty hard, and Wipeout, they did a fantastic job with it. A really underrated like VR experience, but not my favorite. My favorite, and this is what we're gonna end off with, is Astrobot, and this is what I've been wanting to play on VR ever since it came out last year. This game's fucking amazing. Like, this is like one of the best games Sony has ever made. As far as like their in-house developed games, this is the best game they've ever made. It felt like a Nintendo game with its platforming, with its clever level design, with how fun it was, with how challenging it could get. I got the 100% in this game, collected little bots, did all the challenges, and I just had so much fun with it. It uses VR in very interesting ways where you're like looking all around you. Sometimes you have to even look behind you to find different bots. The level design, there's so many clever aspects of it, to it. You're using your DualShock controller. It might be using the touchpad to throw shurikens at spider webs, and then other different tools I don't want to spoil. It's got a vibrant, colorful look to it. It's got attention to detail all over the place. It's got a decent amount of content to it, too. I think it's the perfect length for me. The boss fights are amazing and clever and creative. It's just an utter joy. Like, I would play this game in like 3 to 4 hour sessions. And the VR just adds an amazing immersion to it. It just wouldn't work quite as well without it. Man, this game, honestly, it kind of blew me away. I was just so into it. If you have a VR and you haven't played Astrobot, please get this game. It would have been on my Game of the Year list for last year. Probably like top 3, like number 2, like right behind like Monster Hunter World. Like, it's that good. It might even be worth buying a VR for if you can find like a VR cheap from a friend and you already have the camera. It might honestly be worth getting this game for because it's fucking incredible. It's one of my favorite platformers I've ever played. And I love my platformers, and this game just, it really surprised me. Man, Astrobot is the shit. But anyways, that's it, guys. I didn't want the video to go on too long. What are some other VR games you've played that you really enjoy? Recommend some. Maybe I can try out some others here. I haven't given the VR back just yet. What do you guys think of the VR in general? Are you just interested in getting it? Maybe it's like a pass for you. Maybe it doesn't appeal to you. Definitely, if you can try playing some of these games like Astrobot and Wipeout, though, the VR adds a lot to them, and those are the games where they take it full advantage of the VR itself, and that's like, that to me is VR at its best. But anyways, guys, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.